Hello. Today, Wayward Wine is going to be a smidge less wayward and try a wine you might have heard of. Yep, it's Krug. I mean Krug. I'm wearing the nice jacket. It's Krug today. Krug. Champagne from uh, iconic winery now based out in Reims, aka Reims. This in particular is their Grand Cuvée non-vintage Brut, the 167th edition. Now, that's what makes Krug special, and that's what they hang their hat on, are these single non-vintage editions meant to emphasize the house style. A lot of other producers now produce a non-vintage Brut Cuvée, where they're sourcing from some of the best older vintages as well as with the current vintage to create something that's more than the sum of its parts. And that's the idea behind Krug. Now, they're more or less new kids on the block compared to Veuve Clicquot or Moet de Chandon or other producers throughout Champagne. They only started around 1843 when the others were already, in some cases, generations into producing wine and especially sparkling wine out there. And so Krug focused almost entirely on their non-vintage Brut cuvées, Grand cuvées. And typically today they are sourcing from 250 separate plots that are separately fermented in separate barrels and then aged in separate tanks. And then after that, sampled by the team throughout the years to see how the wines are progressing, to see where they think they're going, and then blended together to create the secondary fermentation. In this version in particular, the 167th edition, they blended 191 different wines together from a span of 13 different vintages starting back in 1995, working its way all the way up to the current vintage for this edition, which is 2011. 43% of the former older wines that they blended in to ferment during secondary, 43% of those are from older vintages. The rest was from 2011. And so you get a nice kind of highlight of the 2011 vintage, but balanced and tamed and curtailed and sort of worked its way towards what Krug thinks Krug should taste like, their house style, their consistent, competent profile of what they think makes for the best champagne. The oak barrel fermentation definitely is a component of Krug that's fairly famed. A lot of producers now don't do that. A lot of producers are just doing entirely stainless before they go to secondary ferment. And so Krug always has a slight more nutty richness to it, a slight depth to it from the time in oak. And we'll see that here. The 167th edition also has 47% Pinot Noir in it, backed by 36% Chardonnay and 17% Meunier, the three main grapes grown in Champagne. And Pinot is clearly king here. It definitely gives a lot more structure and intensity of fruit that you'll always find with Krug. Whether it's worth it or not, we'll get to that at the end. So, taking a look at it, it was a bit more effervescent earlier on, but definitely had a really intense, fine, sparkling pearl to it. That's mellowed out as it's been open, but beautiful kind of medium intense golden color with bright brassy highlights. And yeah, you definitely get a lot of lovely nuttiness from both the extended lees aging that this saw, as well as the barrel time. It's going to be about 7 years doing secondary fermentation, laying on those lees in those bottles, resting and absorbing all those lovely autolytic characters as the lees, the dead yeast cells, break down and exude that kind of, what I get in this case, a sort of like roasted chestnut almost. Definite like nutty almond quality, blanched almonds. But yeah, a little more so though. I think partially from the oak as well. You get that roasted chestnut. Yeah, I mean this is complex, pronounced aroma. If you want to talk about complexity, try a wine that's got 191 wines in it. It definitely shows. This has a range of everything from like cooked pear, baked apple, apple pie almost, to really more interesting things, almost like roasted pineapple. Fairly intense, but it's fairly filigreed. It's very layered. You get notes of cardamom. I almost get a touch of like curry on this, and classic note of champagne, lemon pith, lemon juice, that sort of chalkiness as well as there. And another note I often get with Krug is seaweed, like those little seaweed crackers you get. That kind of briny saltiness that I find in Krug. On the palate, it's expectedly brut, expectedly dry. There's a little RS there, a little residual sugar to tame it. Oh, yeah, wow. The acidity is high. I mean, it is torquing my mouth right now with all that bright, binging lemon zest, lemon pith, lemon juice. Bright, crisp apple as well. It is zinging, mouth cleansing stuff. So expect high acidity. Champagne, of course. There's a slight touch of tannin there. There's a slight grippiness from the thyme and oak, I imagine. The alcohol is moderate, about 12.5%. But it's a wine with depth to it. I mean, this champagne is definitely medium in body, but very present. And where the presence is in the flavor intensity. This has pronounced, rich, complex, layered flavors that start off warm and fruity and friendly. That lovely kind of like pear we were talking about, that apple, that softness is there at the front of it, with a little bit of maybe a touch of vanilla, maybe some vanilla bean. But as time goes on, it sheds that rich, round, ripe fruit, white fruits, white pears, that sort of thing, and develops all those like lovely, cool spice notes we were talking about. The cardamom, which reminds me kind of oranges and orange spice, a little bit of clove, that nutmeg, a little bit of that, maybe that curry spice that's there as well. I'm getting, so yeah, plump and joyous up front, but then it just ratchets down slowly but surely into that saltiness, that brininess, that seaweed. Yeah, a little bit of that nuttiness as well starts coming through at the finish. Yeah, nice kind of like the chestnut that I talked about before, that roasted chestnuts there. And the length on it it's for days. It's for days. I mean, it just is so complex and so long that it just hangs on the palate. So this wine has presence. I mean, some people that I know in the industry jokingly talk about Krug as their burger wine, fancy burger wine, where they get like, really fine burger and a nice little bit of brie and maybe arugula and some other stuff, and go to town on that with a nice brioche bun, maybe. I think almost jokingly, because ooh, that's powerful. Because honestly, this is a complex and expensive wine. It is easily around $200 on the shelf at most places if you can find a good deal on it. And you could find it possibly, if you're lucky, by the glass at some really high-end restaurants for $65, $70, or $80 a glass for a cute little flute of Krug. So it don't come cheap. And the question is it worth it? Well, in terms of uniqueness, there's nothing like it, and each edition is going to be different. It's impeccably made, ageable forever, and yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you're paying $200, you're basically paying roughly $1 per each wine that was in this blend, because it's about 191 wines in the blend itself. So do the math. I mean, that's pretty good value for money if it's $1 a wine. But then again, it's not something maybe for every day. But I think it lives up to the hype, I'd say. I think at this point you're paying partly for the name, partly for the prestige of drinking a top flight négociant champagne. But it's certainly no slouch, and definitely demands attention and demands some serious food. Yeah, you could go steak with this. There's so much Pinot Noir in there with that lovely rich fruit. There's a slight red fruit quality to it as well that you can pick out there. Um, and the tannins and the acidity just, they need fat. They need really rich, beautiful aged brie, triple cream for sure. Just some fantastic appetizers and really good company too to share it with, because drinking Krug alone would be I don't know, ostentatious to say the least. So this is a wine if you have it to share and talk about, and not talk about anything else, because it will dominate all your time. And is Yeah, that's why we do this. It's fascinating stuff, but it's quite delish. So I hope you get to try it someday if you haven't. And cheers, and keep drinking.